Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, next part of our agenda is Freedom of Information Act request. We have none at this time. So we're going to move to the monthly budget reports. Tim, you want to take that?
Yeah, you have in your packet the monthly financial report. The total revenue for the month of August, $1,044,146. I highlighted a number of the items, the major items. Two of the things that there were some questions on, one was real estate taxes and the other was registration fees. The registration fee number, all of the fees that were collected during registration were put into one account. So that's what shows that $289,000. Those fees are going to be pulled out and moved into the different accounts that they belong in, like pay to participate and some of the other fee accounts. So those numbers will be changing somewhat. The special education era flow-through grant and the special ed reimbursement money, that is from last year. We don't budget that in 2012 because when the auditors do their audit, what we do with our financial statements that you receive, they're on a cash basis. So this only shows the amount, the dollars that are received in the fiscal year. When the auditors do the audit, they do it on an accrual basis, and they pull those kinds of revenue items that belong in the past year, and they put those in the past year. So they're not budgeted in 2012. In the audit, they're pulled back into 2012. The real estate taxes, there were some positive numbers in the revenue that normally would be negative that are thought of as the refunds. The other, there's three line items for real estate taxes. There's current year, prior year, and then other, which is all years that go back to 2009 and before. So most of that is the refunds we receive, which is why we budgeted at a fairly high number in terms of a credit number. But we do receive collections on that, and this past month we did receive collections for 2009 and prior years, which is why you saw some of those balances go from negative balances to positive balances in terms of the revenues. The year-to-date revenue for the total revenue, $1,410,000, which is 5% of budget. It was 6% for the operating funds. The expenditures for the month were $2,032,876. Again, I highlighted what have made up that. The vast majority of it, obviously, salaries at $1,452,000. There are some items in the expenditures, if you look in the DCR reports, that are over budget. Some of that's going to be corrected once the budget is passed, and we discussed some of these budget adjustments that we're making. Once those adjustments are approved, then those numbers will go into the DCR, into the financial statement. So some of those items will be taken care of. Others, as we discussed last month, are just items where that we've classified them into the wrong accounts. And what we'll be doing is we're moving those into the proper accounts. So I don't think the number of items that are over budget is going to be nearly what you're seeing today in these financial statements. Operating fund balance is $4.2 million. That's down $1.5 million from the beginning of the year and on July 1st. That's basically the financials, if there's any questions on the financial statements themselves.
Any questions on the financial statements?
I don't need an answer now, but if you could follow up. When you say that the registration revenue, and I assume probably the pay-for-play revenue will come throughout the year, if you could let us know what account it comes into, the numbers, so that we can track it.
Okay.
So a follow-up sometime.
Once we get all the registration numbers, once we take a look at all of that, I'll give you a report on exactly, what was registration fees and what were other fees, how much of that money is paid to participate for the fall sports, and we'll go from there. So.
But I want to know the account it goes into. I want to be able to look at the, the 10-whatever,
okay,
so that I can track that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Okay.
First, thanks for addressing the issues, because it was helpful, so we don't have to ask. Two things. One is the operating fund expenditures. At this time last year, we were 9%. At this time this year, we're 12%.
What page you at?
I'm at, I don't know, there's no page, page 2. in the revenues, we were at 4% this year, and we're at 5%. Excuse me, we're at 5% last year at this time, and we're at 6%. Is that any indication that our expenditures are running higher than we think they should, or is it just hard to tell because of the way we do our budget?
It's hard to tell, but let me look into that, and I can find out something and get you some information on that.
The second one, and again, except we're doing the budget today, and I don't understand this, but you can hold it. It's several times people have said we're on an accrual basis, but we do it on cash. Normally, if you're on accrual, you include the cost that you're accruing for the prior year and that year. You do an entry for it, say it's $100,000, and then you do a reversal at the beginning of next year for credit for the same amount. So then the debits in the prior year, the credit nets out against the actual expenditure in the future year, so there's zero in the budget, and it was counted in the last one. And I can't get my hands around how we do an accrual after the fact and how that is addressed in the current year budget. And I mean, if it's the way we've been doing it for years, and we're just gonna have our budget today, I don't want you to have to, it just doesn't make sense to me, and I don't understand. We've got items in here, whether they're debits or credits, on whatever line that we said we didn't budget because they're being accrued, but the actuals are still in here.
I think when you're trying to put together a budget in April, May, June,
Right.
you don't know if you're going to receive all the money from the state or not. You don't know when you're going to receive it. You don't even know if you're going to receive all of it the way the state is right now.
I understand all
So
that.
when I'm sure when this budget was being put together, the special ed reimbursements, the special ed grants, all of those state grants, all that money with the exception of general state aid, we weren't sure when that money was going to be received. So you really can't, you don't want to budget it in 2012 because you don't know if you're going to receive it in 2012.
I understand that, but it's different than saying when the auditors come in, whenever that is, they're going to reconcile it and do some kind of accrual. So I guess I'll ask it a different way. When they accrue, however they adjust from our cash to accrual, will we do an offsetting entry in the current year for whatever they decide it should have been accrued for last year, so it's not in this year's figures?
In the DCR software? Does the DCR software allow you to do anything accrual, or is it
No.
only cash?
No, it's only cash.
I think the statement he made is we received these payments from the state, and we received the payments of the state recently. This is August, right?
Mhm.
Okay, and when the audit, and it was, those figures weren't in the budget. We didn't expect in the budget ending in 12 that those figures were gonna be received. So
far
we
I'm with you.
received those monies in August.
Right.
Now, the auditors are gonna come in, and they're gonna take a chunk of time, it's 60 or 90 days, and no matter what that money is that you receive in that 60 or 90 days, they're gonna pull it back into your prior year for your audited financial statements. So I guess his statement was, we got these two payments, they were from the state, they were from last year, we didn't budget for them because they were expected to be received in the last year's budget. Now, your question for, do we then go make an adjustment for removing those from the actuals? I think, and he can get back to us on that antiquated program at the treasurer's office, I believe, is only a cash basis thing. So every year we take our books and we have the cash basis and the auditors adjust from there. So I don't think in school board accounting that they go in and make accrual adjustments like you would in a business every month to reverse beginning payables and receivables and ending payable receivables for an accrual basis balance sheet and that type of thing. I don't think that's what that program provides us.
Well, when we're operating for this year, are we ignoring the fact that there's an audit done that's going to do some accrual that's going to take some of this? Because that's unclear to me. Okay, there's definitely revenues, a couple of them over $100,000 that we weren't anticipated, we didn't get, but they're in here. And we're talking about how we're going to manage it and, based on our reserve, and either they're there or they're not there, and they're either going to stay there or they're going to be adjusted, and that's what I don't understand.
And they may not be adjusted within that program. They'll be adjusted for the statements. And
I think also one thing that will help is Tim and I spoke today, the auditors are here right now, completing the audit, and I think I'm going to bring them in front of the board and do a formal presentation, as well as to answer some of these questions, and we're hoping for maybe October.
Well, the audit has to be done by October 15th. I think they'll have it done by then, so probably the November board meeting.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions?
Tim, I think you revised it somewhat. It still would be helpful if we had the account numbers in front of here, page. I mean, this is a simple request.
What page you at, John?
Page
Page 1, like education fund, just whenever you have that, put 10, so it sort of links in our mind.
Okay.
And I know I asked this question before, I don't know if I quite understand it. We still have the first column on page 2 here, budget. When are we gonna get the actual numbers in there? Because to me, it makes more sense to compare actual to actual.
Well, these are the actual numbers through the first 2 months of the year.
No, I'm talking about 2010, 2011, that's our comparison, the first column.
The second one, John.
The-
Second.
The second column is the actual.
For that, for the first 2 months?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, my question is, what was the final for 2010, 2011? I mean, just the way I think, that's the number that belongs there. This column should be the actual numbers.
Okay.
Because what if this budget is like way off? 'Cause
Okay. So
that percentage, the percentage of actual to actual, to me, for 2010, 2011, makes more sense than actual to budget. Do you understand what I'm saying?
So the second column right now is actual for 2 months. You want that to be
Right.
for 12 months.
No, well, the first column, why is it the budget? We don't care, it's spent, it's done. Why don't we have the actual 2010, 2011 for like the whole year there instead of the budget?
because we're comparing it, on the other side, we have a budget for 2011, 12, and this is at the point of time we are at 2 months. So your second column, actual, and then your actual over there, second from the right, is kind of comparing, here's your 2 budget, and here's your 2 actual year-to-dates for the 2 prior years.
Yeah, I can see your point, but to me, the actual number still makes more sense, because it's updated data.
Can I state it maybe another way?
Sure.
I think what John would be useful, and some people brought this up, is to also maybe, and again, I know we've asked this report different ways, but to compare the actual to date 2011-12 to the actual to date 2011. So you're comparing last year's actual, last year's budget at this time, and showing what percent we were at actual this year up to this date, and budget to this date to show where we're at. But maybe a better indicator is what was the actual we were at this point last year, and what's the actual point this year, and you know how much are we off from there? Is that kind of what you're thinking, John?
I can see what you're saying too. I mean,
Maybe it's not, I
Let's
don't
just
know.
talk about education line. The budget was the $16 million number, and at this point in time, a year ago, based on that budget, we had 4% in, the $724,000. So now you go into the next budget, we actually budgeted that we're gonna get more revenue on that line. And what we got to date was 780, and it's 5%. And that was Tim's question, or Laura's question, I think it was Tim's. You know, 4% last year, we collected 5% this year. Is that a good thing, a bad thing, or what is that? That's kind of what this is showing.
yeah,
And
I guess my point is, you got more recent data, it should be there, because my question is that this budget was way off. This number doesn't mean anything to me. We're assuming that, I'm assuming our current budget is more accurate than the one from 2010, 2011.
But as a percentage base, it's a warning sign to tell you whether or not you're in sync with what you did last year at least. And if you're way up, it's a question you ask, why am I up? Like, okay, you can go right now and say in self-insurance for revenue, as a percentage of budget for last year, I was at 7% of budget at this time for year-to-date. But now in this year, I'm 16%. What's the answer? I think it'll help you to highlight questions to ask about that,
If you go down to the expenditures, and this was Tim's question, he said, last year at this time, we had the budget of the 16 million, or 18 million 3, and we spent 1.2 million as of August 31st. which was 7%. And now this year, we spent the 1.995 million, and we've spent 11%. So does that 11% mean that we're having, is that bad, good, or indifferent? That's kind of how this particular report is comparing things. At this point in time last year, we spent 7% of what we expected to spend on that line for the budget. And at this point in time this year, we already have spent 11% of what we budgeted for. So is that good or bad? I think it leans towards, a good question of, is that an indicator of something might be wrong? And I think that was Tim's question.
Well, if you do it in numbers, because I think people listening understand, embellishing Mike's point, at this time last year, our education operating fund, we had spent $1.25 million. This year, we've spent $2 million. We spent $750,000 more to date, which is, what, 3/5, 60% more, or,
But we expected this year to spend $1 million less.
So, that's, and I mean, I know you're stuck with what we talked about and everything, but it's the only thing I can look at is what you overall said. We were at 9% this year, we're at and I agree with John. It's less helpful to know where we were at this year than to know we spent $2 million so far versus 1.125. Is that a problem? And again, I didn't ask the question that way. I mean, I just asked it broadly, but I think that's what we're struggling with, that, is that a problem? Because we don't budget on a monthly basis, we just do it on an annual basis, so.
I think, Tim,
Yeah,
I think, Tim, on this one, especially on this page here, where you see a big a big swing on percentages from last year to this year, maybe have an explanation what's going on with it. That would help out a lot.
That'd be good.
So like right now, you know what I mean, if for next year, for next month, if you submitted this report, I would expect you to tell me self-insurance for revenue-wise at 16% of the budget, and then go down to operating fund, education, you don't have to do everything, but once that you see big swings with it, you should be able to explain to them. Everybody agree with that? John, would that help you out a little bit too?
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
And some of the other ones are the opposite.
Yeah.
We had spent a larger percentage last year than we spent this year, so.
Will some of this start to balance off when we start receiving tax dollars? Will this be,
Well,
A
Won't
budget is
affect
budget.
the expenditures, though.
you're gonna get a wide variance depending on when we collect. We
collect.
collected mainly in December last year, and if we collect in November this year, you're
But
gonna
he
have
can
one
explain
month that is gonna be way out of
But
proportion.
our expenditures won't change.
Right.
Yeah,
We've
right.
already
Right.
spent almost 700,000 more this year at this time from last year.
And he needs to be able to discuss why that percentage is different. But I think the percentage itself would really pop out, gives you a warrant to pop out. Any other questions for Tim?
That was
Right.
very helpful, though, the
Tim,
additional information.
you're moving ahead.
Thank you, Tim.
I like it, you're doing good.
Appreciate
You're
it.
moving ahead with that. So. All right, what we're gonna do right now is let everybody know, we have to go to a public budget hearing for the budget that I know that, you know what, I think Jim just gave a good point. We have some teachers and students here that I don't wanna keep late. So if the board has no problem with it, I'd like to bring up the school field trip, just so that we make sure kids get home and study, and I'd like to see a copy of your test, to make sure that we did good. All right, so it's item F in new business, instrumental music tour. Does anybody have an issue with doing that, so we let these kids go and?
It's a good idea.
All right.
Probably have homework.
Well, thank Jim for his finger pointing, so. All right, Dr. McGowan?
Mr.
What?
Mr. McOlgan.
Mr. McGowan, all right, please. I'd like to treat you
Didn't
with
complete
respect.
my doctorate.
All right, and you want to tell us why you're before us tonight, please?
Well, I just wanted to, first of all, invite you to our concerts this year. We have some wonderful concerts that go on, and the band performed in the von Steuben Day Parade Saturday, did beautifully. And I'm sure you were at the 4th of July parades. We had 154 students and community members marching at those two parades. To reward and motivate the students, we have a tour every 2 years. we alternate with the choir program. Last year was choir and this year is instrumental. So we're proposing another cruise as we've done twice in the past.
Pam, I know there were some general questions asked by the Board of Education. Can you just provide a general feedback on, in regards to, are we liable, or does the third-party supplier do any supervision for us?
No, we provide the supervision, they just transport us places, so I know there was some concern about whether they had background checks, but they're not with our students, you know, they're not providing supervision. We have our own supervisors that they are, you know, our staff members, or our, I'm assuming we might have parents, I don't know who you have a list, and then if you would want those parents to undergo background checks, we could certainly do that as volunteers. But the management tour company is not in charge of supervision of our students.
I thought the other question from the Board of Education was in regards to financial obligations. Is there any financial obligation to the school district? And secondly, is there any financial obligation to the school district in regards to free and reduced lunch?
I know that there is a mention in the board policy about covering students, but that is my belief that is during the school day. Those are field trips that are an extension of the educational program during the day, and then we do cover the cost of those for our free lunch students. But for optional trips that are being done, as Mr. McOlgan talked about, that are motivational, the school doesn't provide the opportunity for those students to go, but there usually are fundraising events and opportunities where the harder the students work, and our student could maybe speak to that, the more money they can put toward the trip, and if they work hard enough, sometimes even offset the cost of the trip entirely. So we have not provided the price of the trip and covered that for those students.
And it's always been my experience, there are some students that families just choose not to go, correct? I mean,
Oh, absolutely. It's completely volunteer.
Okay. I think that was most of the general summary of the questions asked by the board. If there's any other ones for them?
So I want to clarify, so this trip is completely optional. It's not part of the curriculum. It's something that we offer because it's, you know, enriching for them to do, nice opportunity. And so my question was, what specific reason, why is this coming to the board? You know, if that was in the framework, exactly what are we approving? So what are we liable as a board to approve? Because there shouldn't be any, I guess funds might be, as a school district or as a board, do we need to talk about, well, if we're offering this optional trip, as a board, are we going to fund teachers to go? That's a board issue. Or as a board, are we liable or indemnified in some way for this trip to happen because it's under the auspices of the school?
And from my understanding, I think, first of all, the school assumes no financial liability. And that includes for instructors, chaperones,
Absolutely.
for staff. There is no financial obligation to the board. In previous districts, usually these types of field trips are brought before the Board of Education to more or less explain that there are representatives from the school, taking students from the school. They will be representing Riverside Brookfield High School. They will be introduced as Riverside Brookfield High School at some venues that they perform at, and more or less to probably receives the board's approval, or just to take students on an overnight trip, if I'm not mistaken.
What is our legal, maybe Tim, you can help me out here, you know.
I'm
as a-
not the board's attorney, but
Well, I mean, maybe I'm not asking the question, I'm having, you know, trouble, I guess I'm asking, why is this board business? You know, can't the school talk with the principal, and I guess I've never been able to wrap my mind around that. We don't have a financial obligation, and you're saying we have no liability issue. So,
I'll give you a non-legal answer. I think
Okay.
we should look at the policy on field, Kevin put it on the list to do of 6240. I think it's unclear we're interpreting it in one way in one part and in a different way in a different part. It does say in there, if it's over, 200 miles, the field trip, it's got to be approved by the board, but it seems like we're waffling a little on how we define a field trip or not. So, I mean, I would suggest for the purposes of today, listening to the people that we address the fact it's over 200 mile and they're representing the school. And because of that, we'll assume that it's under the auspices of this policy 6240 and then look it over in the policy committee and see if we should clarify it.
So does that policy refer to trips that are part of the curriculum? Because this trip is completely optional.
Yeah, but look at the other side of
Okay.
it. So, okay, we say it's not part of the curriculum, and they take a group of kids down there that say they're all from RB, and something that's not very desirable happens, whether
Right.
it's kids getting in trouble, or the boat sinking,
Right.
or whatever it is. And can we sit here as a board and say, oh, you know what, they told us it wasn't part of the curriculum, so we had nothing to do with it?
Well, and in that sense, I'm just saying that because this has come before the board, and I feel I have a little tension that what we're approving, does it cover, some terrible event, or some obligation from the board, or by approving the trip, I'm not clear what our obligation to this group is as a board.
Any other questions?
We've done this for trips to the Galapagos Islands, to Disney World.
Ireland.
We do this as
To
a
France,
normal
to
course
Europe.
of our business.
Yeah.
If you're concerned, we'll get the attorney, we should direct the superintendent to get clarification on why we do this, but this is what we've done the 2 years I've been on this board and the years before we've done that. Didn't you approve trips like this when you were on the board prior?
And I've asked always the same questions. I don't,
Is the answer?
and
I think it's a good question.
I have tension that we're not giving our families or the language is unclear. What do they get from us knowing that we've approved it? And why is it important to us that we approved it? I mean, it's good that we know it's happening, but I think there should be something more in here.
Well,
Well, maybe
Yeah,
there's
this-
a trip is proposed that we don't agree with, then we should vote it down. So I think we can vote this, yes, we agree with the trip.
Yeah, this is up for a vote.
And sometimes like, okay, let's have a trip to China. No, okay? I mean, that's
So-
sort of the idea, I think.
Then let's get the policy committee who they said they're
Look at
gonna
it.
do something.
We'll look at
Let's direct the superintendent to get you those answers.
we're going to have a similar question on some other items on the agenda. What does the policy say, and what's our practice been for a long time? So regardless of the specific language in the policy, in my opinion, we've had a practice as a board to come up before these and either support them or not without really determining the specifics on the agreements and the liability and all that. So I'd say we should use past practice, in my mind, to go forward and take a closer look at the policy, so the next time it's perfectly clear what our obligation is and what people have to come to us for and what we should approve or not. How does
I only
that
have-
work for you?
All right, I only have one more legal question. So if we approve it, that means we've condoned the trip, and something terrible happens, the ship sinks. I mean, it's
Right.
just egregious. I would
Everybody
like-
knock on wood.
Yeah,
No,
geez,
no, that will never
I
happen.
used
I
an
mean, it's
example
just
that I
so
thought would
bizarre.
never happen, by the
But-
way.
Do the families have comfort knowing, are we then liable for that?
Did you read the permission slip in the package?
I did see where we are indemnified from those things.
Said every reasonable effort shall be taken.
Every reasonable effort, but, where does it end? I mean, if something terrible happened, do they sue the school and say a terrible event? Or if there's been bus accidents, the bus crashes, is it us that's liable?
I think that's why we have a representative from the attorney's office and I think the several attorneys that work on our policy manual that send us these press updates, I think they provide some of the general protection to that. And I think as long as we show that there wasn't willful, negligence on the school's part or a staff member's part, I think we avoid some liability.
Well, and I think the question you asked too, and we've asked this before in prior years for trips, is the company that you're using and the cruise ship that you're using, you've used before, are they well recommended? Do they have a recommendation? Are they
Highly recommended.
highly, and they do
we've
school
taken our other-
organizations?
Oh, sure.
Okay. All right, any other questions? All right, now, my one other question, okay, Dan, do you have one? Or-
No, it was just saluting.
My one question to you is, when do you need When do you need a decision on tonight, or can you wait till our October meeting?
I was hoping for a decision tonight because
Okay.
the families will want to start fundraising.
Okay, all right.
Resolved that the Board of Education Township High School
Hold on a
District
second.
208.
I wanted to say something. Just, he didn't say, does anybody else have any other comments?
Okay, does anybody else have any comments?
Yes.
I thought he did.
Two things. One is, hope you know, we're not picking on your thing. We're trying to look, this would have happened to anybody else.
I understand that.
And the second thing is, we've talked to Kevin, and, you know, we're hoping that we don't get these proposals and have to vote them on the same night in the future, so, you know, just so we have time to think about it, okay?
Okay.
Pam, right?
Right, we've
Okay.
talked about bringing new items in the retreat, bringing new items to the board as new business, and unless it's actually time urgent, that we'd have some time at the committee of the whole to discuss, and then bring it as old business in the following month. So it's almost, you know, you could touch it, you could see it 2 or 3 times before you have to take action on it. Today's request came forward because with some of the families in current economic times, they wanted to start fundraising ASAP.
Sounds good.
Okay, any other? Okay,
I do have one question,
Okay.
looking at this. How do you enforce the policy of sending somebody home?
It's happened just once in all the trips I've taken the kids on. That was my very first year here. We went to Washington DC, and the kids were flown home.
So does someone have to come with them on the way home, or you just put
Those-
them on the plane? or-
Those 3 were actually sent. We called the administration, and those 3 kids actually flew home.
Okay, so there's teeth in
Alone.
this policy is what I'm asking. Okay.
The parents agree to absorb the cost of the air
Of the return.
transportation before you send them.
and they also acknowledge by signing it that they are responsible for if they have to be sent home because of behavior or conduct.
Yes, we have a trip meeting with everybody that's going involved with the travel agency and
Okay,
thorough information.
any other questions, discussion? Mike?
I don't have it in front of me.
Okay.
Resolved that the Board of Education Township High School District 208, Cook County, Illinois hereby approves the instrumental music tour cruise to Florida from June 2, 2012 through Saturday, June 9, 2012, with the tour cost to be determined based on the number of participants as presented in the September 13, 2011 board agenda packet.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Dan Moon. Any other discussion? Mary Ann, please go for the vote.
Mr. Grishin?
Yes.
Ms. Westphal?
No,
Mr. King, or Dr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Moon?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Mr. Cindy?
Yes. Okay, thank you very much,
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
You gotta let us know what your test scores were next day, all right, please?